pictures on his Facebook fan page, I noticed too, of himself and his family spending time with his kids. I don't blame Bret Hart for having all these photos up in light of this news, which comes as tragic news for every Hart family fan that we have out there that I know exists by the millions. When you're talking about Canadian fans, I'm not so sure. While I can't speak for the American fans, I know there are millions of Canadian fans of Bret Hart, being a Canadian myself, who is one of these rare Canadians that we will find who was never the biggest Bret Hart fan, and I'm not afraid to admit that I was never the biggest Bret Hart fan. There was just something about Bret Hart, that I just never enjoyed being around. I remember watching him in the 1990s, and I saw his final match in this province of Newfoundland back in the summer of 1997 when himself and his brother Owen teamed up and fought Mick Foley and Stone Cold Steve Austin. The match was literally almost a half hour. It was the main event of the first half of the night. And the funny thing was, years after that happened, after they won against Steve Austin and Mick Foley, when Bret Hart was asked about his last match here in the province, he couldn't even remember what it was when he returned years later, about 15 years to the date of that match in I think the first part of 2010, 2011, when he returned to the independent level rather. He couldn't even remember, where that match was. But I was there. I saw the match. It was a good match. But the thing was, that was Bret Hart's last match. And I think, the thing that people remember most about Bret Hart is the fact that he was a constant performer back in the 90s. They don't remember the watered-down version of Bret Hart who showed up in 2010, 12 years after what they called the Montreal Screwjob, which is what it really was. It really was a screw job with everybody involved in it, from Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Johnny Lauer, Earl Hebner, who was the official in the match, who was told to ring the bell. I interviewed him. I interviewed a lot of the Hart family members, so I kind of know this. But to me, Bret Hart was just never one of those enjoyable wrestlers that you enjoyed being around all the time. The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, they were all individuals that you enjoyed being around. But when it came to someone like Bret Hart, he was just one of those guys that you just couldn't stand to be in the same room with or even know about. And I've heard a lot of stories, too, apart from that, of who Bret Hart was as an everyday individual, how sometimes you could get along with him on his best days, and on his badder days, he just didn't want to be spoken to in that locker room, because he was always one of those guys that was on edge, always had to have everything go his way or no way. And I think him walking out of WWE, faxing in his 14-year resignation out of Vince McMahon and World Wrestling Entertainment at the time, back in the 90s, and documenting it for a wrestling documentary that would have been released a couple of months after, Bret Hart Wrestling with Shadows, which is a documentary that I watched and actually was one of my favorite wrestling documentaries of all time that focused on some of the greatest Canadian wrestlers like Bret Hart. That documentary, I thought that was just kind of Bret Hart getting his own way again. Bret Hart always had to have everything go his own way. And the funny thing is, I've had these conversations with everyday wrestling fans about how karma always plays a significant role in the career of a wrestler. You don't really respect the chances and the opportunities you've been given. I'm not saying that Bret Hart never respected any of the chances and the opportunities he was given, but the thing is, karma always has a way of coming from out of nowhere and blindsiding you with something unfortunate. And I guess this is a way of karma playing out in not really the favor of Bret Hart and getting him back for everything that he did unprofessionally in his life, because he always had a way of bringing us down and doing so many things unprofessionally. I don't think I'm wrong in having said anything that I've said about Bret Hart in the way of an opinion. Obviously, my opinion of Bret Hart is not really that high over a wrestler like Shawn Michaels, who was one of my favorites and actually was my definitive favorite of the 1990s, especially in his 30s when he was winning championships for the first time. The WWE Championship reign he had, his inaugural reign as champion, was phenomenal, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I say that he was never someone who allowed himself to be outperformed, and why Bret Hart never could outperform someone like Shawn Michaels or The Undertaker, who ultimately were more enjoyable wrestlers to have been around in my lifetime. It was just always a way for Bret Hart to just kind of put himself over, winning matches all the time, when really he was just someone who was very, this has to be my way or no way kind of thing. And I guess, karma always has a way. The conversations that I had with some people, and one recent conversation I had with a girl, we had a conversation about how karma always has a way of coming from out of nowhere and getting you back when you least expect it. And I guess this is karma's way of paying Bret Hart back for, everything that he did unprofessionally in his life. But I do, despite how I may feel or not feel about Bret Hart, want to take the time to wish him well in his fight with cancer, because he does have a chance of surviving this fight with cancer, although the percentage of his chance of surviving his fight with cancer may not look that great and look very grim at this point in time. You know, stranger things have happened. I know Roddy Piper is an example of someone who fought cancer and won his fight with cancer prior to his passing away, which was just a couple of years ago. I remember, you know, coming home from being out of town on the weekend of Roddy Piper's passing, and I remember hearing several syndicated radio DJs and broadcasters talking about Roddy Piper's unfortunate passing, of how they found him in his hotel when he was on tour with wrestling organizations on the independent level. They found him in his hotel room one night, and he was just passed out. I think it was the following morning, actually, after they finished an independent show at some kind of taping or whatever, and then the next morning they found him there in his hotel room, unfortunately dead. But the thing was, prior to that, you know, he had a lot of challenges. I know this because I was really good friends with Roddy Piper, and you know, one of the things that he always had to put up with and deal with were these challenges that was always presented to him in his life. One of the challenges was cancer. He fought it and won. I know Jake the Snake Roberts is battling cancer. He's having a little bit of a difficult time doing it, but he's surviving, and there is a chance at 58 years of age that the Canadian legend Bret Hart will pull through this. So I want to take the time to wish him all the best. I have several of the Hart family members on my Facebook page, and I have interviewed a lot of the Hart family members, and like I said, I sat down with the author of Chris Benoit and the Hart family tragedy, so I know, you know, that a lot of people have their own accounts of these incidents and these tragedies that seem to have haunted and followed the Harts everywhere they've gone, this being the latest tragedy that will obviously haunt them, and obviously every one of the Hart family members had to be really feeling it in their souls for Bret Hart, wishing there was probably more they could do, and probably us as wrestling fans wish there was more that we could do. And I don't blame wrestling fans for feeling the way they do about Bret Hart's diagnosis, but that's just one of these unfortunate things that just happens in professional wrestling, and just goes to show you that wrestlers who we may have thought were superheroes at one point in time not necessarily are superheroes. And that's one of the things I wrote about in the column where I commented on Bret Hart's fight with cancer. His prostate cancer is obviously affecting his life, bringing him down, but he is taking every minute of every day that he has left in life to really enjoy it and really take it for what life is really worth. And that's one thing that's really outstanding about Bret Hart. Bret Hart can be defined as a warrior, and I think that because of his courage that he showed in his fight with cancer, promising us all that he's never going to be giving up, that's one thing that really stands out to me. And stood out to me when I wrote about this for my column in this corner with Jonathan Clarke on Bret Hart's fight with cancer, was the fact that he promised all of his fans, the majority of them, that he was never going to give up in his fight. He was going to demonstrate great courage, and obviously from the support of people like Roman Reigns and John Cena, who all posted on Bret Hart's Facebook fan page and Bret Hart's Twitter at Bret Hart. The thing is, everybody's support is obviously helping Bret Hart and benefiting him in the long run, and it will definitely go the distance in solidifying Bret Hart's legacy as, if not the greatest of all time, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. And here's a question I have for all my subscribers to my YouTube channel and my Facebook page, even my Twitter. Do you believe that Bret Hart is one of the greatest of all time? He's a WWE Hall of Famer. He has his Hall of Fame ring and his plaque for every contribution that he made to professional wrestling. But even with him being a Hall of Famer and the mixed responses Bret Hart has received and gotten over the years, do you believe that he is and can be considered one of the greatest of all time? If he's not one of the greatest of all time, he obviously is his accolade of the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. Although I may have never been the biggest Bret Hart fan out there, the thing is, I agree with Bret Hart's accomplishments. His resume definitely speaks for itself, and he is very deserving of that Hall of Fame ring. A Hall of Fame that has welcomed less than 100 wrestlers over the years. We may be getting up to over 100 wrestlers that have been inducted into the Hall of Fame of recency, with the class of 2016 being the latest, featuring The Godfather and the featured induction of Sting this year, which I'm really looking forward to. But if the Hall of Fame seats less than 100 wrestlers at this point in time and was built for anyone, it obviously was built for the likes of Bret Hart and Sting, who will join a class of legends this year in 2016. I think it was in 2000 and when was it? 2006? Yeah, 2006 was when Bret Hart went in the Hall of Fame. It was 2006, 4 years after that. He came back to WWE to patch up the thing, to bury the hatchet, so to say. 2006 We saw him go in the Hall of Fame, and if there ever was someone the Hall of Fame was built for, it obviously was Bret Hart. As I want to take this time to wish him well in his fight with cancer. There are a lot of ways this can go. I speak to the everyday individual who's having to deal and put up with a fight with cancer, and it can be very challenging on times. This is one of the most frightening and one of the most depressing things that anyone can have to deal with it. I know myself from personal experience. I have never been diagnosed with this sort of thing, but I am diabetic, and I did see my mother put up with a very constant fight with cancer that still haunts and resonates with me to this very day. And, whenever I hear about someone like a Jake the Snake Roberts or a Roddy Piper circumstance, and one of the latest being Bret Hart coming from the Hart family, this being the latest tragedy to follow on haunt the Hart family, obviously, everywhere they go. It brings me back to 2006, the year Bret Hart went into Hall of Fame, and my mother's fight with cancer, and watching her have to go through that whole horrible ordeal, because that's really what it was, a truly horrible ordeal that I wouldn't wish on anybody. And that's why I kind of want to take this time to wish Bret Hart all the best in his fight with cancer. He may not have been a 5-star performer all the time, and he may have exemplified unprofessional qualities and, different things over the years. But the thing is, no matter how you may or may not feel about Bret Hart, there are those Canadian fans out there who are diehard Bret Hart fans, who I know exist, who will always argue and always say that Bret Hart was, if not one of the greatest of all time, definitely the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. And that is something undoubtedly that Bret the Hitman Hart is never, ever going to be forgotten for anytime soon. Off of that, I'm your host, Jonathan Clarke. You can get in on the conversation, as always, in the comments of this video blog at JonathanClarke22 by subscribing. If you haven't already, you can follow me on Twitter at JonathanClarke1, and you can get in touch with me on my Facebook page and Google Plus at the same, HEW Entertainment, and let me know what's on your mind as it relates to the diagnosis of Bret Hart with cancer. This is a constant fight. That's a never-ending fight, and battle. But if anyone can win this fight, it's Bret the Hitman Hart, for being known as the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be, and possibly, if not, one of the greatest of all time. I'm your host, Jonathan Clarke, and I will talk to you again next week. Thank you guys so much for listening to me, and I will talk to you again really soon. Like what you hear? Tell us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.